Welcome to the 6th edition of An American Journey. What's on today's agenda? Inspire me.
So we're going to talk about three things today, Michael. We're going to talk about a classic American motel. I hope you've stayed in one of those. We're going to talk about Chattanooga in Tennessee. And we're going to have an update on all the news items that we have covered so far in our podcasts.
Excellent. So tell me why you want to focus on the American motel. And you'll be surprised here, Julian, I've got some very distinct views on them. So I just want to know why that was the one you picked for our number one topic.
Yesterday, we were travelling down and making a long journey, and we broke the journey and we stayed in a classic American motel. So when I was thinking of the topics, I thought, that's a good topic. Let's choose that one. I personally like classic American motels. I suspect you may have a different view, but we'll find that out a little bit later.
And what are the key characteristics of a classic motel? So, for example, I'm assuming the ability to walk to your room within less than 20 steps should be a defining feature. What do you think?
The motel, which was originally called a motor hotel.
Yes, I knew that.
Motel.
Yeah.
You enter the room directly from your car rather than from a central hotel lobby. So you move from your door to your hotel room, as you say, within 20 steps, maybe within 10 steps.
My second one was it would have to have a plastic shower curtain a la Bates Hotel. I mean, if it's a classic one, we've got to have and maybe a 1950s TV, black and white only.
Definitely not the latter these days. So the motels first came about. The first one was 1925. Which is obviously shortly after the Model T came into being. And there was this massive demand for people being able to have accommodation as they make longer journeys throughout the great country of the USA. And it reached its heights in the 1960s when there were about 60,000 properties. Today there are fewer, and actually the classification between a motel and a normal hotel is a little bit blurred these days. The classic motel room, for those people who haven't stayed in one, it's a basic rectangle. And at the end, you have a bath with a toilet and the shower curtain that you've eloquently described, Michael. And then you have some basin or basins. And then you have a king-size bed or maybe two queens if your room is set up that way. You have a microwave and a fridge. A TV with about 200 channels, what used to be 200 channels. I remember when I first went to the first motel in the late 80s, and I was amazed coming from our 3 or 4 channels in the UK, suddenly to be confronted with 200 TV channels. You've got a folding luggage rack. You have an ice bucket where you can go and get ice from the ice machine in the central area. And then you have an alarm clock, which the previous occupant has helpfully set at 5 a.m. and forgotten to turn off. And then you have some noisy AC, which blows onto the bed. So that's your classic motel room. Have I missed anything, Michael?
I think that very eloquently described. Now, my beef is, of course, that classic motels are getting fewer and fewer. And
Yes.
Instead, and I'm going to have to name drop, so is it Hampton Inns? Or Super 8s or even Travelodge appear to have replaced them. And these are soulless places by and large. And indeed, you do have to often walk a long way from your car to the room via the reception. Having said that, I mean, it's cheap accommodation. You've got all the amenities. But the ones that I've most enjoyed is where they have done something to make it unique. So like cookies at sort of 4 p.m. in the afternoon was one of my highlights of doing it. But by and large, I fear that the classic American motel is getting fewer and far between as the bigger chains have taken over.
Well, that's right. Everything you've said is correct, except that your Travelodge was actually the first franchise motel. So 1945, them and Best Western, they were the first to set up, much larger groups Best Western, all of those were owned independently, but Travelodge introduced the franchise system. What I think has happened is they have moved to more of a centralized lobby. And they have much less personality, some of these chains like Motel 6 and Super 8. Those have a little bit less personality than the old days. But independent classic motels still exist. Typically, the motel is placed on an interstate. So it's where a lot of people are driving through and people stop. They break their journey. If they're doing a 15-hour journey, rather than do 15 hours driving in one day, they do 2 lots of 8. And so as the interstates have been added in, those motels which are not on an interstate, which are on a sort of secondary road, if you like, it's been difficult for them to get business. And so last year when we drove across the US, we came across an absolutely classic one. I went into, and Lorna was so concerned about my safety at this motel that she backed the car in and had the car engine running just in case I had to make a quick exit from the kind of supermarket thing that they had in their central lobby. I wish we had stayed at that classic motel. It was under new ownership, and that new ownership I established was 1993. And they had this great system where they had a video library. You could borrow any of video, presumably as long as it was before 1993, and watch it in your room. So an absolute classic motel. We wish we had stayed in it. The woman who owned it and operated it was lovely. It was the only sort of shop or hotel for, I don't know, probably 30, 40 miles around. And she had this wonderful supermarket which didn't have any corridors, didn't have any alleyways. So all it was produce. And instead of having all of the crisps in one area, she had ordered it into some sort of system only known to her. So the only way you could get anything was to ask her whether she had any of the produce that you were looking for.
So just take me on, because I'm talking modern ones as opposed to the ones you just described. But the modern ones not only tend to be quite soulless, but they may be accumulated with 2 or 3 nearby. And because they are interstate stops, they have eating establishments nearby, which again tend to be, and I suppose some people find it very reassuring that, I don't know, when you go to Starbucks, it doesn't matter where in the world you go to Starbucks, it's the same place. I don't get that. But there was one, and I think it was on your recommendation, Julian, that Joan and I went into a Cracker Barrel. Is it Cracker Barrel? Got the right name?
It is Cracker Barrel.
For a breakfast.
Did I really recommend it?
You recommended it. And let me, if anybody listening hasn't been to one of these places, a little bit like Julian says, you go through the shop, which is selling everything from Christmas trees through to guns or whatever, before you get to
the shop is half of the premises, isn't it, Michael?
It is. And then you go to the breakfast place. And of course, the delight is watching people buying things in the shop and trying to correlate between a person and what they're going to buy. Needless to say, when we were there, Joan did manage to buy 2 Christmas ornaments, which I thought for, when was it? I think on October Day, a nice sunny day, breakfast, Sunday morning breakfast, that is some mean achievement. But Cracker Barrel was definitely a cracker of a place.
Did you enjoy the food at the Cracker Barrel?
I thought it was very average, very average.
Well, that's good, because most of the other stuff is below average.
And in fairness, the waitresses, they were very good. It was a very busy Sunday morning, but no,
yes.
Not the best of food. But another part of the American experience. The second thing to say, Julian, is, of course, I, in my mind, associate motels with Route 66. Now, again, having travelled in certainly that area, interestingly, of course, Route 66 doesn't exist anymore, but you've still got bits of it, and at various places you've got motels who are claiming to be on the original Route 66.
Yes.
Again, I felt somewhat as if we were being sold a story that actually the Route 66 is no more, yet we have hotels saying, come on, stay on this legendary Route 66.
Have you seen the movie Cars, Michael?
I'm not sure I have. Which?
It's an animated movie.
Oh, no. Yeah.
In that movie, essentially it talks about the fate of a road which has been replaced by an interstate. And I think that's what they've done with Route 66.
Yeah.
All of these motels and other shops, which were along what used to be the busiest highway, into California, they have tried to recreate the glamour of Route 66 by saying, hey, drive down the Route 66, visit our premises and relive what it used to be like before the interstate came here. It is, I think, original, the stuff which is along Route 66, but is somewhat fabricated because they've had to recreate the glamour of driving down this road, which is slightly slower than the modern interstate road. If you're in that part of the world, it's a pleasant enough experience to drive down a little bit of the Route 66 instead. Wouldn't you agree, Michael?
Oh, yeah. And you pick up parts of it as you're going through. So, yeah, that's worth doing. Going back to your motel that you didn't stay at, why didn't you stay at it? Was it Lorna's concern, or why not stay there, given it met all the criteria?
We had accommodation booked further along. That's the reason why. Otherwise, I would have stayed there, and if I had lived to tell the tale, I would have written about it.
Okay. And as part of the preparation, and yes, I have done some preparation for today's podcast, I did go on, and you can Google the top 50 American motels. And actually, having done that now, I think if I'm planning my next road journey, I would want to tick off 2 or 3 of them. Because some of them, even the architecture or the sign architecture is quite iconic.
Yes, they have those neon motel signs, don't they, to try and attract you to their establishment rather than a rival establishment. Art Deco signs, which are incredibly both iconic and attractive. As you said earlier on, at key intersections along the interstates, the one we were stayed at, when was it? Not last night, the night before, had 19 hotels.
Yeah.
Or 19 motels. So, there's a lot of choice. Most of those choices nowadays are brand names rather than independent motels. Most of the people who stay at motels are people who are driving through. They stay one night, they arrive late and they leave early, and they're just using it as a place to sleep. But you can get motels which are in tourist destinations themselves. We stayed at another motel in a place called Rehoboth Beach in Delaware. And it was, it was a classic motel shape. I think it was independently owned. It was called the Dunes. So people can stay there for multiple days. The other type of person who stays at a hotel are people who don't have homes. So you quite often find in the places that you stay that there will be longer term residents there. And some motels will be given up entirely to longer term residents, people who are there for months at a time. Quite often they'll have kitchenettes which are installed in them. And you get weekly efficiency rates rather than daily rates. Have you come across those, Michael?
I don't say I have, but I do know, and it's a couple of years ago now, there was a big press about a couple who lived in a travel lodge and lived there 365 days a year, and why they just like the company. They like meeting different people coming and going.
Right. The one we stayed in couple of nights ago, that obviously had some longer term residents. They weren't very interested in meeting the people who were just passing through. Clearly they were making themselves very much at home in the swimming pool. Have you seen the film Florida Project, Michael?
No, I have not, Julian. Tell me about it.
Definitely one to put on your list of watching. It's about a motel where people are living for a long time, and they include lots of mothers with their children. And this is about a mother who is struggling to get by and look after her children. It's an absolutely fantastic film. It was nominated for an Oscar 2 or 3 years ago when it came out. Really outstanding film. And that is set in a motel.
So anything more on motels, Julian? Do we?
The prices of motels are interesting. When we first came to the States in the late 1980s, we were able to get a motel room for $20, which at that time was £10, which compared very favourably to a UK B&B. They've since gone up. They're now sort of minimum $80, maybe as much as $100. If you have a motel in a tourist area, and that tourist area is very popular, that same motel room might cost you $400 or $500. This summer, motels must be getting more use, and the reason for that is a massive shortage of rental cars. Last year, during the pandemic, many of the rental car companies went into bankruptcy protection and they sold a lot of their stock. They went from 90% utilization to less than 5% utilization almost overnight, and they had no income coming in. So they sold a lot of their stock, and the car manufacturers haven't been building cars as quickly as they hitherto were because of a shortage of chips. Most cars these days are very electronic. There is a massive shortage in the US of new cars, which has caused a shortage of rental cars. So people wanting to go on vacation, and this year everyone wants to go on vacation, people have been booking places and then finding that they can't rent a car. Initially, they've been doing things like hiring a U-Haul, a truck, because that's the only vehicle they can rent in their location. So more people have been traveling to their vacation by their own car and using more motels than before.
I knew about the chip shortage.
Yeah. A top tip for listeners, if you are planning a trip to the US, make sure you can book a car before you book your flight. Because if your trip relies on you having a car at the other end, you need to make sure that you can book that rental car. And don't be surprised if the rental car prices are a little bit higher than normal.
Yeah, and so coming back to what I was going to say, the recommendation that if you are doing a, say, fly-drive holiday in the States, absolutely at least one of the motels you should, or one of the places you should stay should be a Classic Motel to get the true American road experience.
That's right.
Try to avoid the more standardised versions, which are there. They're comfortable. They do, they're very easy and nice to stay at, but you don't quite get the true American road experience.
When I say Chattanooga, what does that bring to your mind?
Choo Choo. And the Glenn Miller song, not that I like the Glenn Miller song, but what I can say, Julian, when I was travelling in Tennessee and I realised that Chattanooga was in Tennessee, it was definitely... Chattanooga was, it was difficult for me to say, Julian. It was in Tennessee. I had to go and see it.
And this song, Michael, can you remind me how it goes?
No, I can't, Julian, so I'm not going to do that. And it I would struggle to sing it. I know of the song, but more as a train aficionado, it is one of the historical train centres of the States. And so we should also point out, and I'm sure you've done your research, that, of course, it's not the original one. The original depot actually was demolished, but the current Chattanooga Choo Choo Hotel, which is obviously in the old railway station, including carriages which you can stay in, is definitely worth a visit. And you realise the enormity of the place because you can see the number of platforms it had, because it clearly was at a hub of the American railways and critically important in the American Civil War. But sadly, and we were talking just about the motel, the growth of motor cars and people driving themselves probably spelt the end for Chattanooga. It is definitely one of those places to go.
Okay. Let's go back to the song then.
Yeah.
Did you know that this was the first gold record, Chattanooga Choo Choo? First record to sell more than 1 million copies. 1.2 million copies it sold. It was number one for 9 weeks. And as you say, it was by the Glenn Miller Band.
No, I didn't know that, Julian. I did not know that.
You probably remember the lyrics, Michael. So we had track 29, Pardon Me Boy, or Boys. Is that the Chattanooga Choo Choo? Yes, track 29. Well, I'm sorry, there was poetic license taken there, Michael.
No.
Because Penn Station only had 21 tracks. Being directed to the 29th was incorrect directions. And then the train went through Carolinas in the song, but in reality, the train did not go via the Carolinas. If you're basing your experience of what happened on the train, the song is a bad place to go.
So the original train that it's about was not about the station, but the train, and that was from New York to Chattanooga. Yeah? Yeah.
That's right, yeah. There were 3 different trains which were going from New York to Chattanooga. They can identify the train they were talking about because it was nearest the time that they had said in the song.
Okay, didn't know that.
And did you see anything else? So you obviously, you go somewhere and you go and see a train museum.
Yes.
That may not be what everyone does.
No, that's true.
How was the train museum?
Well, remember it's a hotel. I like architecture. I like railway architecture. So the original booking hall is impressive. You can then walk through, and of course they have got both carriages and steam engines there. They are playing the music as you're walking around, Julian. So yes.
I'm a bit disappointed you didn't give us a rendition of the song.
No, Julian. And from memory, there's a very impressive clock. And obviously, there's lots of history you can read about it. As I said, it's worth a visit. When I was doing the research, though, you talk about the train to New York, but isn't this the fact that this was a junction where they had trains literally to all places going to the States? And I'm assuming it's because it's in the centre of the States. So one of the things they reference is the Dixie Flyer. And you're going to tell me, of course, the other favourite tune of mine, Julian, which you can sing if you want, related to trains in America?
Trying to think what it would be. What is that other one? Take the last train to Clarksville.
No, not a monkey side. No, what about Arlo Guthrie, City of New Orleans?
Oh, right, yes.
Yes. So trains and music go together. Steam trains and music, yeah.
Did you get to see anything else in Chattanooga?
Not really, no. We had lunch, went round the railway museum, and actually I was due to go to Heritage Line, but we got there too late and it had closed. We were on our way to, from memory, I think it was Louisville was going to, not Knoxville. Louisville
in Kentucky.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So I've been to Chattanooga many times.
Why?
When we lived in Atlanta, it was 2.5 hours away, which is, in US terms, just a quick trip to the shops. We used to go to Chattanooga quite regularly. It's a really nice little town. It's not a big city. It has had its problems in the 70s and 80s. It had a lot of what they call white flight. This is when white people left the city for the suburbs of Chattanooga. And it left the downtown a little bit decrepit. But what's happened since is that they built a number of apartment blocks in the center, and the downtown has recovered. And it's really a very cute little downtown. Chattanooga itself is on the River Tennessee, or Tennessee River, and you can walk or cycle along the river. You can kayak or boat down the river. There is a great restaurant on the river. Is that the one you went to? Did you go to the boathouse?
No, we had to eat in the railway hotel, didn't we?
Yeah, so if you had longer, then I would have said go to the Boathouse restaurant, which is a great view over the Tennessee River. There's a pedestrian bridge. They've got a great museum of American art there. They have minor league baseball in the AT&T Stadium, in a sort of beautiful little stadium. And then at the end of September, they have a free bluegrass festival that you can go to in the center, which we always went to every year. It's a very nice little town of a medium size. From my view, if you are passing nearby, it's a good place to stop for a night and enjoy the town environment of Middle Tennessee.
And you can't miss it, because over the hotel, Chattanooga Choo Choo Hotel, is a huge sign.
Oh, saying Chattanooga Choo Choo.
Yeah, and you can see it for miles away.
You say, I haven't been to this hotel.
Ah.
Yeah, it's got trains in it. For our listeners, how would you rate Chattanooga?
You've been there many more times than me, and you've given a much more comprehensive account of the place, which sounds great. But even just to go around the Railway Museum, it's definitely me. For a one-day visit, it's definitely going to be an 8. 8 out of 10.
No, we're doing the marks out of 5, Michael.
Oh,
we can't then change it to 10.
Okay, well, 4. 4. We go to 4. We go to 4.
Okay, so 4 out of 5. I think that's right. I think that's right. It really isn't a must-go-to place in the States. But if you are passing nearby, it's a nice little town. And on a nice summer's day, walking or canoeing by the river, that's a really great thing to do.
Yeah, and to return to the earlier conversation around motels, I mean, if you want to see what I call is true America, and you want to spend time with Americans, these are the places you should stop and visit. Again, what I do remember, the friendliness of the service, truly interested in why you're visiting, and there's a great danger that you get into, if you fly drive, get into the car, do the interstate, and rush to get to your destination. I think you miss a lot if you don't go off the interstate, look at the place, and just almost walk down the main street and stop and have a lunch. You get the true American experience, and that's why I would recommend it. Julian, in past issues, we've addressed what we think are topical and current issues. For example, masks, the budget, Meghan, and then the mayoral election of New York. So I thought it'd be a good idea just to see what's happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks to give our listeners an update. And given Monday is Freedom Day in the UK, and even though, as we speak, the Prime Minister, bless him, is now self-isolating again, and you couldn't make this up, the Health Minister, the newly appointed Health Minister, goes to a care home and the following day gets COVID. In theory, from Monday, Julian, you won't have to wear a mask, although you advise you should wear a mask, but you don't have to wear a mask. How are things in the States when it comes to mask wearing?
If you remember, back in May, in our first podcast, I reported that the CDC, which is the federal body which advises on health matters, had said that you do not need to wear a mask inside if you are fully vaccinated. And that was quite a big announcement at the time. A lot of people were dismayed because they like wearing masks or they thought that was the appropriate health thing to do. But the federal agency said you do not have to wear a mask inside. So what has happened since then is that in most places, people are not wearing masks in the US. Decisions on health are not made by the federal government, they're made by local government, either by the state or the city, or indeed by private companies. You have this situation where most places there is no sign at all of any masks, but in some cities, for example, LA and San Francisco, they have said you still need to wear a mask inside, and we recommend you also wear a mask outside. And there are a number of cities like New York and Philadelphia where on transport systems you still have to wear a mask when using those transport systems. And I would say there's around about 75% adherence to those city policies. But in many other places, Florida, Georgia, Delaware, South Carolina, you will not see anyone wearing a mask. The exception to that is that you have some local communities, for example, some African American communities that I've been into recently, where you have low vaccination and you also have high mask wearing. And there are some other communities, like Trump-type communities, where you have low vaccination and low mask wearing and high infection. And we are at a point at the moment when round about 300 people a day in America are dying. All or almost all of those people are people who've chosen not to get vaccinated. And in the States, you've been able to get a vaccine from about April onwards. Anyone has been able to get a vaccine, if they choose to. So that's the update. Any questions?
Observations. In the UK, the gamble is that since we've got 3/4 of the population inoculated at least once, maybe twice, and the fact that that's reduced the number of hospitalisations. And remember, the lockdown strategy was to prevent the National Health Service being overwhelmed. But now we're coming out, so infections are rising rapidly, as high as they were back in January. But thus far, hospitalisations has been relatively low, and therefore deaths relatively fewer compared to January. Is that the same trend in the States?
It's the same trend for vaccinated people. Hospitalisation rates are high because there are so many people who are choosing not to get a vaccine here. But amongst people who are vaccinated, I understand that very, very few people who are vaccinated are being hospitalised, and even fewer are dying.
Yeah. Now, we have taken something from the States playbook. Last weekend, we had vaccination centres offering a winner 2 tickets to the Euro final and 2 tickets to Wimbledon. Because what we've discovered, particularly in the male population, the 18 to 24-year-olds are not getting vaccinated. So when I say 3/4 are vaccinated, what we've discovered is that actually young people don't feel the need. And of course, it's not that they're going to get seriously ill by and large, but it's a question of will they then infect people who are more vulnerable. And that's the gamble that's currently taking place here. And we will see, because infection rates are rising dramatically.
I'm sure infection rates here are quite high too. Because people are vaccinated, most people are vaccinated, not 75%. I think there's quite a large community of people who refuse to get a vaccine here. 300 people dying per day is still quite a large number. As those people die, you are seeing people in those communities saying, well, perhaps I should get vaccinated. And I do meet people from time to time as I'm traveling who, for whatever reason, are refusing to get a vaccine. I guess the only thing which will change their mind is as their loved ones go to hospital and die. So that's the update on masks, and I wish the UK good luck as they move towards Freedom Day. We'll see what happens from there.
Watch this space. We'll be reporting. $1 trillion budgets then, $6 trillion. What's the latest update on that, Julian?
Well, we've got 2 new proposals with 2 new sums of money. So the first of them is a infrastructure bill, which is worth probably something like $3.5 trillion, but could be only $1.2 trillion. And the second, which is an infrastructure bill for sort of social environmental programs, which is another $3.5 trillion. These are 2 proposals from what they're called sort of Biden proposals, but actually they're developed by other senators. So the principle behind these bills is that there is this massive investment in the US and that they will tax more in order to improve infrastructure like roads and internet and pre-K education. The way that it works in the US is that you have to get approval through the House of Representatives, you have to get approval through the Senate, and then the president has to approve. So at the moment, the Democrats have a small majority in the House of Representatives. There's a dead heat in the Senate. The thing about the dead heat in the Senate, although the presiding vote, if it's 50-50, the presiding vote is by the vice president, there is this thing called a filibuster where people against the bill can keep talking and talk out the bill unless they get to a 60-40 majority. So to get to that 60-40, they have to persuade 10 Republicans that they should support the bill, and they have to make sure they don't lose any of their, Democrats don't lose any of their own votes. There is a bipartisan bill, which is worth $1.2 trillion, although some of that is just the same as the UK, where they announce this sort of huge amount of money, but some of the money actually is money which had already been earmarked from previous bills. They do that in the UK, don't they?
They do.
They announce something 3 and 4 times, and all the time it sounds like new money, but often it's the same money. So there's this bipartisan bill for $1.2 trillion. There's this Democrat proposal for $3.5 trillion. And they're going through the process of trying to get that approved. A separate bill is for social environmental programs, which is for another $3.5 trillion. And that is less certain about how that's going to fare. There are some Republicans who are in favour of some sort of infrastructure bill, but they're not in favour of this huge sort of social environmental programs being run by the federal government. There's a sort of a mega spending program which continues to go through the very slow process of approval in the States.
Can I assume, somewhat naively, that when it's infrastructure projects, what the Democrats are able to do are to lobby Republican senators where the infrastructure is going to impact most? So there must be a series of horse trading projects for particular states, which hopefully will get the bill through.
Yeah, it's called pork barreling, Michael. You persuade somebody to support the bill by giving them something for their local community, which you then can claim credit for. That is exactly one of the things that's going on with these senators. Who knows what it is which gets that senator to cross the line? It's a very narrow line that they're crossing, because obviously they're saying, hey, we want to spend $3.5 trillion, which is a lot of money. But if it's this bipartisan proposal, which is $1.2 trillion, then maybe you lose some of the Democrat voters as well. There are some skills which go to creating these bills. Often the money is spent in ways which isn't necessarily the purpose of the bill. The money is spent in order to procure somebody's votes.
And your take on the American economy? Does it need this sort of prime pumping?
My take is the American economy definitely doesn't need this prime pumping. However, I think the infrastructure bill is around improving fundamental infrastructure like bridges and roads and that type of thing. And I think the American country definitely needs that infrastructure spending. Whether that is the type of thing which is going to be spent from this bill and the social environmental program, I don't know. But I would definitely say that the infrastructure in some places in the US needs improving.
Yeah.
But the economy does not need this money. To my mind, I see inflation in lots of things in America. The federal government says it's only temporary. I'm not so sure.
Yeah. But as we were advocating earlier, if you're going to do a road trip, you find out very quickly that the interstates are in serious need of investment.
In some places, yes. In some states, the interstates are terrible. In other places, they're very good. So it just depends where you're travelling.
Does that take us on to Meghan? What news from Meghan then?
Not much. She has published a book called The Bench, which is a children's book, which I have to say I haven't read. It hasn't received that many good reviews. It is selling some copies, but frankly, not many more than my book, High, Wide and Handsome, An American Journey. They are planning a number of Netflix programs, so they have a deal with Netflix to produce a number of different TV shows. She is working, I should say she and Harry, but I always think of her as wearing the trousers in the relationship. She is working with David Furnish, Elton John's partner, on a couple of projects, I think. They have produced a podcast. Have you heard about this podcast?
No, I have not.
So they've been paid $25 million by Spotify to produce a series of podcasts. And so far they've recorded one podcast, which was released in December last year. Hasn't been a single podcast since then.
Oh.
That's interesting. And now, obviously, in her defense, she's had a baby. I assume she's on, some form of maternity leave. This is our 6th podcast in the space of a couple of months or so. So, she's not really quick on the old podcast, or Meghan and Harry are not particularly quick on the podcast. There has been a Lifetime TV, which is a TV channel here. They have produced their 3rd film on Meghan and Harry, which has hit the newsstands, and that features the infamous interview with Oprah Winfrey. Not much news from Meghan. She's released a book. There are some Netflix programs promised, and there are some podcasts promised. Not much news on that front.
Well, he's got a job, hasn't he? He's now, I'm going to say, it's a fancy title, but with some sort of well-being app. And now, whether he's truly working there, but that's that. He's been coming back to the UK. They unveiled a memorial to his mother.
I saw the picture of the statue, yes. Is that a big tourist attraction in the UK?
I don't think so yet. But who can tell? It will be probably Americans going to watch it, because I don't think a lot of other people will. But the big issue was, did he and his brother make up would not appear to be so. It still seems that, and I'm sure for some considerable time we'll have the Kate versus Meghan debate in Hello or whatever, so.
Right. Oh, they're still on the front of all of those types of magazines here in the US. When you go to the supermarket, all of those magazines, they have the two of them on the front of every magazine. That's
Meghan.
Bungled elections.
Yeah, well, I see Eric Adams got in.
No.
As my economist let me down, it did a profile of him as a new mayor.
Well, for the first thing, if you remember, it was a primary election. So this was the election to decide who the Democrat candidate was for New York mayor. The winner of that contest has to stand against the Republican candidate, which will happen in November. So no one gets to be mayor until they've won the final contest. Indeed, Eric Adams has declared himself the winner of this election. So if you remember, the election was massively bungled when they were using new software to manage this election. They were testing the software, and from the test, they left 135,000 test votes on the software. So when they came to release the results of the election, they had this extra 135,000 bogus votes, which were there, which was about 15% of the turnout. So this latest week, you're right that Eric Adams declared himself the winner. And then very quickly, the election officials in New York said, no, that's not right. At the moment, he is leading by 8,426 votes, but they still have a number of votes left to count. And then somebody said, how many votes have you got left to count? And they said, well, we got 55 votes left to count. So why they were doing an interview rather than actually counting those 55 votes is unknown to me. It's clear that he is going to be the winner, but he hasn't formally been announced as the winner. So a month on from the election, we still don't have a formal winner, although it seems very likely that Eric Adams, who is an African-American ex-policeman and moderate Democrat, will have won the election. His main mandate is, what he wants is to fight crime, and he opposes defunding the police. And he garnered most votes from the outer boroughs, so i.e. not Manhattan. And in particular, he garnered a lot of votes from various different ethnic minorities who tend to be a little bit more moderate in their views than the white people of Manhattan. Anyway, so 1 month after the election, we still don't have a formal winner. I think it is reasonably likely that there will be a legal challenge by the two people who came in second and third place. Ultimately, I see that he will be the Democratic candidate, and then when he goes into the November election, he is very likely to win because, one, he is a moderate type of guy, and secondly, there are 6 times as many Democratic voters as Republican voters in New York City. We are coming towards the end of this sort of bungled election, but the story continues.
But that's why when I read it, if you get the Democratic nomination, it's almost a shoo-in you're going to be the mayor. So the other thing was a concern as to whether he would be able to deliver on his election promises.
Oh, right. I didn't read this. What did they say?
And again, particularly because it's supposed to police strategy. What is uppermost in the voters' minds in terms of the sort of police force you want and the police force you've got. And it suggested he's sitting uncomfortably between sort of, being hard on crime, but equally having a police force that, if you like, is well regarded and respected within the community. The two can be quite contradictory aims, can't they? Given the composition of some of the New York boroughs.
And obviously, having spent a month recently in New York, the crime in New York City is much lower than it used to be. So it's a much safer place. I think people who live there see some signs that crime is getting worse. They do not want to return to the days of the 1980s and 70s when, they felt unsafe in their own city. So the message, I think, from this election is we want somebody who is going to be tough on crime. Who better to elect than somebody who is an ex-policeman? Will he be able to keep a lid on crime? I suspect he will, because he is an ex-policeman. He was elected on that platform. I would say that they will probably be able to be re-elected in 4 years' time, because he probably would have done a reasonable job at keeping crime reasonably low.
Is stop and search an issue? Because certainly in London, you've got these two competing things, that being hard on crime means upping the sus, stopping and searching people randomly, which, by the way, affects in certain communities in London one population, the black community. Okay. On the other hand, it is highly effective in reducing crime. And so you're trying to balance the two between this sort of the stop and search, which impacts a percentage of the population, but does reduce crime. And certainly with Black Lives Matter, lots of arguments as to whether we should be doing this or not. And you can see politicians being very uneasy around, we want to be hard on crime, but using the sus laws to do that, not sure whether that's going to be good for us. What's the view of New York around that?
Well, I don't know necessarily the views on New York. They don't call it stop and search here. It's kind of something else. I might even dispute whether stop and search does actually lead to reduction in crime. Here, the issue is about making sure that you deal with small crime rather than allowing small crime to carry on. Here, the thing is, deal with the small crime, and the people who commit the small crimes often commit the bigger crimes too. And if you deal with that smaller crime, then you often prevent the bigger crimes. Now, I don't know about New York, just not sufficiently well read enough to tell you. What I saw in my month in New York was things, I saw people who were basically pretty law-abiding.
Yeah.
You go other places and you can see laws being flouted all the time. In New York City, there's the odd law which is flouted. People obey the law because the penalty is high if you don't, So if you are jumping the turnstiles or something like that, if you're caught, you're going to get punished for it. Whereas I think previous administrators just ignored it. Just said, well, it's fine. You're not harming anyone if you're jumping a turnstile at a subway.
Well, Julian in New York famously trialled the broken window strategy, didn't they? And again, today the evidence doesn't necessarily support that, but it did appear by cramping down on small crime, you stop big crime. Again, a little bit like the sus laws in the UK. The jury's out in terms of how effective that was, but we'll see.
Of the people in London I know, the black people in London that I know, who are, they're my friends, so they are law-abiding. They are extremely annoyed and irritated by the fact that they are stopped multiple times per week for doing nothing, other than having a different colour face.
Yeah.
And it's difficult not to sympathise or not to empathise with their situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Deal with actual behaviour rather than indications that someone is more likely to commit a crime.
Yeah, and by definition, if you're stopping and searching, you're doing so on the basis of observing somebody, aren't you? And therefore you're working on the assumptions, do you look like a criminal? Rather
than have we seen you behave in a criminal-like way.
But as I understand it, in the debate, there is real evidence that does drive down crime in certain areas. So it's that difficulty of how you run both together, because it's not easy.
Yeah, well, in New York, what is clear is that police presence is very high.
Yeah.
I didn't see any indications at all of antagonism towards the police. Mm. And I travel very widely throughout all of the boroughs. There seem to be pretty friendly interactions from what I could see.
Do they have lots of people on the beat, Julian?
Everywhere, yeah. They weren't in cars or bikes or horses. They were everywhere you went, but they were within the community. They were very visible. And of course, they also represented the population of New York City. They were of obvious different ethnicities and backgrounds. And obviously, there are issues with crime in every place, around the world. But from what I can see, many of the police issues that we have, they're not really centred mainly around New York at this point.
Okay.
They're in other jurisdictions.
Thanks for that update. That concludes the 6th episode of American Journey. As always, Thank you for listening. If you can give us a review on your favourite podcast provider, that would really help. Julian tells me we now have had over 300 downloads, so I sense momentum. As a trailer, we will be doing this shortly using the wonderful technology of LinkedIn Live. So you'll be able to see Julian wherever he is in the States, and you'll be able to see me in the office talking about... Do we have topics for next time, Julian, you want to share?
We've got a number which we are going to deal with. We've had a number of questions from individuals that we are going to be addressing, but we're going to try and address those at moments which are topical. So we're going to do something on getting into university and the differences between getting into a US college versus getting into a UK university. But we'll deal with that one more or less when the A-level results come out. So we've got a number of things which are planned. But as always, if you have a question, then please ask it and we'll do our best to tackle that question.
Obviously, we're encouraging you to give us reviews, and we're delighted to give GG from GG, I wonder what GG is, a bit of a thank you. And thank you very much, GG. What they said was, I have really enjoyed listening to this podcast. It's informative and super fun to listen to. And that's our number one task, isn't it, Julian? Make it super fun to listen to. So until next time.
It certainly is, but can I just raise one point? I just wonder whether there is somebody being a little bit naughty with this review, knowing that we read the reviews, and they've just given you a tongue twister in GG McG from GG. They just wanted to hear you say it, Michael.
Probably, and given my struggle with Chattanooga,
Chattanooga.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to GG McG from GG's next contribution. Until the next time.
See you soon.
Cheers. That concludes the 6th episode of An American Journey. I must try to remember the title of this, American Journey.
We got a new review, haven't we, Michael?
Have we got a new review, Julian? Did you text that to me?
I did.
A new review.
It's a short review.
This was on Friday, yes?
Yeah, probably.
The review, which, if I've got the right one, I've really enjoyed listening to this podcast. It is informative and super fun to listen to. Is that the one?
That's the one. Do you want to do it properly then?
Yeah.
It's got a nice review from GG McG from GG. Okay.